The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement as a young girl, no more than 10 years old, walked quietly along a familiar route. Her school uniform, slightly wrinkled from the day's activities, fluttered in the soft breeze. She was in no hurry, head down, earbuds in, clutching her backpack like any other child heading home from school. She had done nothing wrong. Suddenly, the silence was broken. A stern voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding, "Hey, you! Stop right there!" The girl froze, her heart skipping a beat. She slowly turned to see a police officer approaching her with quick, heavy steps, his hand resting on his holstered weapon, his eyes fixed on her with suspicion. Without a moment's hesitation, the officer demanded identification. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket for her phone, not to make a call, but to check the time, maybe even the name of someone who could help. The officer's voice grew louder, more impatient, as bystanders turned their heads. "I asked you a question." His words rang out like an alarm, yet the girl said nothing. She couldn't. She looked around, there were eyes on her, but no one was stepping in. Her phone buzzed in her hand, another text message she was too afraid to check. She bit her lip, her gaze darting between the officer and the device. The officer, clearly agitated by her hesitation, took a step closer. "I said, give me your name." The tension in the air grew with every passing second. Would she speak? Would she reveal the truth that would change everything, or would she continue to keep her secret, hoping it would protect her just a little longer? The screen on her phone lit up once again, a name appearing briefly before her trembling hand gripped it tighter. The officer, still oblivious to who she was, leaned in, now inches away. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell for more daily real-life stories like this. You won't want to miss what happens in our next story. Maya Thompson was like any other 10-year-old, bright, full of promise, and content with the small joys of childhood. She was a quiet girl, the kind of student who could spend hours lost in a book or sketching in her notebook. Her teachers admired her discipline, her classmates often looked up to her, though Maya never sought attention. She thrived in the calm of solitude, her imagination finding a home in the pages of the novel she carried everywhere or in the delicate lines of her artwork. An ordinary day for Maya began with the ring of the school bell and ended with a peaceful walk home, her backpack weighed down with textbooks and unfinished sketches. It was on these walks that she found a moment of tranquility, an escape from the noise of the world. She would let her mind wander, thinking about her latest art project or the next chapter of the story she was reading. But on this day, things would be different. Maya had no idea that the path she took so often, the same path she trusted, would become the setting of an encounter that would strip away her innocence in an instant. Her father, a man known to the public as a figure of leadership and authority, was never far from her thoughts. To the world, he was the mayor, an official known for his calm demeanor and firm stance on justice. But to Maya, he was simply Dad, a protector, a guide, someone who told her bedtime stories, attended her art exhibitions at school, and made sure she understood the world, even if he didn't show her all of it just yet. Yet today, Maya walked alone, unaware that the world her father often shielded her from was about to confront her directly. She had faced many challenges at school, typical of any child her age, but nothing had prepared her for what was coming. This was not a world of art and imagination, this was a world of judgment, authority, and power, one that did not pause for innocence. In Maya's eyes, there was no reason for concern. She knew the rules, respected authority, and trusted that adults were there to protect her. She wasn't one to question authority, at least not openly, there had never been a need to. And so, on this day, as the sunlight flickered through the leaves overhead, she took each step home without a hint of worry. Little did she know, a simple question from a stranger, a man in uniform, would lead to a confrontation that would change how she viewed the world. An officer, who had no reason to stop her, no justifiable cause, would instead see in her a target. In his eyes, she wasn't just a little girl walking home, she was something else entirely, though she couldn't possibly understand why. And so, Maya found herself standing before a force far greater than anything she had encountered in her 10 short years. Her quiet life of reading, art, and family would suddenly collide with a world of racial injustice, one where authority figures abuse their power, and innocence is far too often overlooked. On this normal school day, 10-year-old Maya didn't know that a simple walk home would thrust her into the middle of a confrontation that would change everything, a moment that would draw her into a harsh reality, a reality her father knew all too well. How could she know? She was simply Maya, a child with big dreams, a sketchpad full of possibilities, and a mind full of stories yet to be written. But in this story, she was not the author. Today, the words would be written by someone else, someone who saw her not for who she was, but for what they believed her to be. It began like any other day for Officer Daniels. He had walked this beat countless times before, patrolling the same streets, passing the same shops, nodding to familiar faces. To him, it was routine, just another uneventful afternoon where everything felt predictable, within his control. But on this day, something caught his eye. Across the street, standing by a corner, was a young girl. She didn't stand out in any remarkable way, she was just a child, quiet, absorbed in her own world. But something in her presence stirred an instinct in Officer Daniels, an instinct shaped by years of assumptions, shaped by the biases he carried, biases he never questioned. To him, she didn't belong. A fleeting moment of suspicion turned into certainty, though no words had been exchanged, no crime had been committed. Yet, in that instant, he made a decision. He crossed the street, his pace deliberate, his gaze fixed on her. "Hey, you!" His voice, sharp and commanding, shattered the silence around them. Maya flinched, the weight of his authority falling upon her with an intensity she had never experienced. Her heart raced as she instinctively turned toward him. Confusion swept across her face, but she stood frozen, unsure of what she had done to draw his attention. Officer Daniels closed the distance between them quickly, his steps heavy, his presence overwhelming. He towed over her, his uniform a stark contrast to her small, fragile figure. Without introduction, without explanation, he spoke again, this time more direct, more forceful. "What are you doing here? You got any ID on you?" Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't used to this, she wasn't used to being treated like a suspect. Her voice faltered as she tried to process the words. She was just a child walking home from school, how could this be happening? Her hand instinctively moved to her backpack, but not fast enough for Officer Daniels. His gaze narrowed, his stance grew more rigid, and in that moment, everything changed. He saw her hesitation as defiance, her silence as something more threatening than it was. His words, once sharp, now took on a harsher edge. "I asked you a question. What are you doing here?" His voice carried an accusation that Maya couldn't understand. Her mouth opened, but the words didn't come. She glanced around, hoping someone would intervene, but the people passing by remained silent. Some avoided her gaze altogether, while others watched from a distance, unsure of whether to get involved. And so, the scene unfolded in painful isolation, as though the world had moved on without her. Maya, alone under the weight of an authority she hadn't been prepared to face, found herself trapped between fear and confusion. The officer's frustration grew with every second she failed to respond. To him, her hesitation was suspicious, her silence was an answer in itself. He took a step closer, his shadow now fully covering her small frame. "You think I'm playing with you?" The words were no longer a question, they were a threat, a warning that something worse could follow if she didn't comply. Maya's pulse quickened. She could feel the phone in her hand buzzing with another message, probably from her father, wondering if she had made it home yet. But how could she explain this? How could she explain to the mayor, her father, what was happening? She was just walking home, she didn't belong in this kind of moment. And yet, here she was, facing accusations she didn't understand, with no one stepping in to help. Officer Daniels, now visibly agitated, looked around. His tone shifted from sharp to something far more intense, his words cutting through the air with a coldness that made the situation unbearable. "Let me see your ID, now." He demanded answers that Maya didn't have, pressing her harder, inching closer, as if her silence was a provocation. Maya stood frozen, trapped between doing what she was told and protecting the secret of who she really was. In her mind, revealing her identity might only make things worse. The few onlookers who had stopped to witness the interaction kept their distance, some clutched their phones, perhaps recording, but none of them spoke up. The weight of the moment fell squarely on Maya's shoulders, a child in the crosshairs of a system much larger than her, a system she didn't fully understand. And so, the questions continued, each one more aggressive than the last. Maya could feel the pressure rising, the eyes of the officer boring down on her, his words filling the space between them with an undeniable tension. "What are you hiding, huh? Why are you here?" The barrage of questions hung in the air as Maya stood there, trembling, trying to figure out what to say, what to do. Her mind raced, her heart pounded, and still, her voice refused to come. She looked down at her phone, the message from her father unread, and wondered what would happen if she just told the truth. But before she could decide, the officer's hand hovered over his radio, his impatience growing. Maya had a choice to make, reveal who she was or remain silent and face whatever came next. What happens now? She thought. But in that moment, it seemed that no one, not even she, had the answer. As the minutes stretched on, the confrontation between Officer Daniels and Maya only grew more intense. His patience, if there had ever been any, was wearing thin. What had started as a routine interaction was now something far more charged. Every question, every command from the officer, layered with a pressure Maya could hardly comprehend. And yet, she stood there, still unsure of what to do, still holding her phone tightly in her hand, feeling it vibrate again and again. Officer Daniels' posture became more rigid with each passing second. His voice, once merely authoritative, now carried an edge that made the air feel heavier. He demanded answers, answers Maya wasn't sure how to give. "What's your name? Where do you live? What are you doing here?" His words came at her like a barrage, and with every question, Maya felt smaller, more trapped. Her mind raced, but no solution seemed clear. She knew who she was, her father was the mayor, a man known for standing up for justice, for doing what was right. But at this moment, Maya didn't feel protected by that title, she felt the need to hide it, as if revealing her identity would complicate things in ways she couldn't control. The officer took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the phone in her hand. "What are you hiding?" he asked, his tone sharp and accusing, as if her very presence on the street was an offense in itself. Maya's hand tightened around the phone, the name flashing across the screen. A call from her father, the man who could fix everything with a few words. But what would it mean if she answered? Would it make things worse? Her heart pounded in her chest, every beat reminding her that time was running out, that this situation wasn't going to resolve itself. But what could she do? Speak up and expose who she was, or remain silent, hoping it would all just stop. The officer wasn't waiting for her to decide. His questions continued, each one more aggressive, each one pushing her closer to the edge. "Why aren't you answering me? What are you doing in this neighborhood? You don't belong here." The last words hit her like a blow. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, her mind reeling. She had walked these streets 1,000 times before, this was her home. How could he look at her and say that she didn't belong? Around them, the crowd began to grow, a few curious onlookers watching from a distance, unsure of what they were witnessing but sensing that something wasn't right. Some held their phones, discreetly filming the interaction in silence, others exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. The tension was thick now, the kind of tension that made people look away, pretend they weren't involved. Maya felt those eyes on her, but none of them offered help. None of them stepped forward. She was alone, standing before this towering figure of authority who seemed determined to break her. And still, her phone vibrated in her hand, each call from her father a reminder that she had an out, a way to end this confrontation. But at what cost? "Pick it up," the officer barked, startling her. His eyes flicked to the phone again, suspicion rising with every second she hesitated. To him, this was confirmation that she was hiding something, that she wasn't just a little girl walking home from school. "Who's calling you? Let me see the phone." She was alone, standing before this towering figure of authority who seemed determined to break her. And still, her phone vibrated in her hand, each call from her father a reminder that she had an out, a way to end this confrontation. But at what cost? "Pick it up," the officer barked, startling her. His eyes flicked to the phone again, suspicion rising with every second she hesitated. To him, this was confirmation that she was hiding something, that she wasn't just a little girl walking home from school. "Who's calling you? Let me see the phone." Maya clutched it tighter, her mind racing with conflicting thoughts. If she answered, would the officer listen? Would he believe her, or would it only make things worse, escalate the situation beyond her control? Her father's voice was on the other end of that phone, a voice that could bring this all to an end. But she hesitated, unsure if revealing that secret would bring her safety or more danger. The officer's frustration grew with each passing second. His voice cut through the air, louder now, demanding answers that Maya couldn't give. "Why aren't you answering me?" he yelled, his tone leaving no room for defiance. Maya felt the weight of his authority pressing down on her, but still, she remained silent, her fingers trembling around the phone. The crowd shifted uneasily, a few whispers rising as more people stopped to watch. A woman near the back nervously held her phone up, capturing the moment in shaky hands, but no one spoke. No one stepped in to stop what was happening. And so, Maya stood there, her silence becoming an answer in itself. Her mind flashed back to everything her father had taught her, about standing up for what was right, about protecting herself, about being strong. But at this moment, none of that seemed to apply. The rules her father lived by, the rules that governed their home, seemed so far away now. The officer's voice snapped her back to reality. "I'm calling for backup," he muttered under his breath, his hand moving to the radio on his shoulder. Maya's heart raced faster. She couldn't let this get any worse, she couldn't let this go any further. But what could she do? Her phone vibrated again, the screen lighting up with her father's name. Her breath hitched in her throat as she considered it once more. Should she answer? Would that be the right thing to do, or would it only make the situation spiral out of control? The crowd seemed to shift closer now, some watching with bated breath, others turning away, unwilling to witness the confrontation any longer. Maya stood alone in the center of it all, her fate hanging in the balance as she tried to decide what to do. The officer, growing more impatient by the second, demanded once again, "Give me the phone." And in that moment, Maya made her choice. Her fingers hovered over the screen, the ringing in her ears louder than anything around her. The world seemed to slow, the noise of the crowd fading, the officer's voice drowned out by the sound of her own heartbeat. This was the moment, the decision that would change everything. And then, with a trembling hand, she answered the call. As Maya's trembling hand lifted the phone to her ear, the scene remained tense and unresolved. The officer loomed over her, still barking demands, his voice hard and filled with growing impatience. He had no idea who he was dealing with. To him, she was just another kid, another face in the crowd he could control with his authority, another moment in his day that he needed to dominate. But Maya wasn't just any child. Her father, the mayor of this city, a man respected by many and feared by some, had sent her off to school that very morning with a hug and a reassuring smile. He had no idea that she would walk straight into a confrontation that would test not only her courage but the power that came with their name. It had been a quiet breakfast, like most mornings in their household. The mayor, known to the public as a composed and unflinching leader, had a softer side at home. To him, Maya was more than just his daughter, she was his pride, his little girl, the one person he worked tirelessly to protect, both from the dangers of the world and from the harshness of his public life. "You've got your lunch?" he had asked her in a routine exchange as he stood by the kitchen counter, scanning his phone for the day's schedule. Maya nodded, slinging her backpack over her shoulder and giving her father a quick smile. "Anything important happening today?" The mayor looked up, his gaze softening at the sight of her, a calm presence amidst the noise and demands of his role. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Just the usual meetings, nothing too exciting," he replied. "But remember, if you need anything at all, just call me, okay?" Maya, used to the protective tone in her father's voice, had laughed lightly and waved it off. "I'll be fine, Dad." And with that, she had left, completely unaware of how her father's words would come to echo in her mind only a few hours later as she now stood on the street, face to face with an officer who had no idea what was about to happen. The flashback fades, and we return to the present, to the growing tension between Maya and Officer Daniels. The officer, still oblivious, continues his harsh questioning, his eyes narrowing as Maya tightens her grip on the phone. To him, her silence is incriminating, her hesitation another sign of guilt. "Who is that?" he shouts, his frustration boiling over. "Who are you talking to?" But Maya doesn't respond to him. Her mind is elsewhere now, replaying the moments from this morning, her father's face, his words. She feels the weight of that unspoken truth in her hand, the phone that connects her to the one person who could end this ordeal in an instant. The audience watches, knowing what's at stake, understanding that Maya's decision to speak or remain silent will determine everything. The officer, however, remains trapped in his perception. He still sees her as just another girl, one who needs to be put in her place. His hand hovers over his radio, ready to call for backup, ready to escalate the situation further. The crowd around them has grown, but it's not just the size that's changed. There's a shift in the air, a sense of unease. People are beginning to sense that this confrontation isn't just another street interaction. A few whispers ripple through the onlookers. Some recognize the officer, a familiar figure known for his rough handling of situations, while others glance at Maya, trying to piece together what's happening. Yet none of them know what the audience does. They don't know that this child, standing alone amidst an increasingly hostile situation, is far more connected than anyone could imagine. And that's what makes the moment so tense, so filled with potential for everything to change. As the officer continues his tirade, Maya's grip tightens on the phone, her mind racing with what to do next. She can hear her father's voice on the other end, calm but growing more concerned with each unanswered call. And then, just for a moment, a brief flash of memory returns, her father's hand on her shoulder that morning, his gentle smile as he reminded her once again to call him if she needed help. The mayor hadn't known that his words, said in passing, would hold such weight later that day. He hadn't known that his daughter would face a test of strength he couldn't have prepared her for. But the audience knows now. The audience can feel the shift, the stakes rising with each unanswered question from the officer, with each glance Maya takes toward her phone. The weight of her identity, of who she really is, hangs in the air, unseen by the officer but known to all who watch. "You going to answer me or what?" the officer demands again, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing as he looks down at her. But Maya doesn't flinch, she doesn't move. She's still holding the phone, the connection to her father live, but she remains silent, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The officer's ignorance, the crowd's growing unease, and Maya's internal struggle all collide in this moment. The tension builds, and though the officer doesn't know it yet, the truth about who she is will change everything. But for now, Maya waits, the audience waits, and the officer remains in the dark, unaware of how drastically the power in this situation is about to shift. As the confrontation lingered, it became clear that the situation was reaching a breaking point. Officer Daniels, already impatient and frustrated, was losing control of his restraint. He had asked his questions, demanded his answers, but Maya had remained silent, each moment of hesitation pushing him closer to the edge. He couldn't understand why this young girl, so small and quiet, was resisting his authority. To him, her silence was defiance. Every second she didn't respond seemed to confirm whatever suspicion he held, whether it was justified or not, whether it made sense or not. It didn't matter anymore, he had decided that she needed to be dealt with. The officer's voice cut through the uneasy murmurs of the crowd, louder and sharper than before. "That's it. I'm done playing games with you," he snapped, reaching for his radio. The coldness in his tone sent a chill through the growing group of onlookers. Maya felt her stomach twist, her breath catching in her throat as his words began to blur into threats. "I'm calling for backup," he barked, his hand firmly gripping the radio, the signal of escalating danger hanging over the moment. "If you don't start talking right now, we'll settle this at the station, you hear me? I'll take you in." Those words, "take you in," hung in the air, heavy and final. Maya's heart pounded faster now, her pulse racing as the fear swelled inside her. She hadn't done anything wrong, she was just walking home. But now, the threat of being dragged away, of being taken into custody, was real, and she didn't know what to do. The phone still buzzed faintly in her hand, her father's name glowing on the screen. One answer, just one answer, could change everything. But Maya hesitated, torn between the fear of what would happen if she revealed the truth and the anger rising in her chest at the injustice of it all. Why should she have to reveal who she was to stop this? Why should she have to prove anything to someone who had already decided she was guilty of something? As these thoughts raced through her mind, the officer took another step closer, his hand reaching out. He wasn't waiting for her to decide anymore, his patience had run out. Without warning, he grabbed her arm, his grip firm and unyielding. Maya gasped, the sudden contact jolting her. She stumbled slightly, her phone slipping from her hand and hitting the pavement with a soft thud. The sound echoed in the sudden silence that followed, the crowd's murmurs fading into hushed whispers. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The officer's hand remained on her arm, his grip tightening as if she were trying to escape, though she wasn't. Maya's eyes widened in shock, the fear now palpable in her trembling frame. She looked down at her phone, lying face up on the ground. The screen still glowed, and in that moment, the name on the screen became visible. Not just to her, but to everyone watching, her father's name, the mayor's name. The officer glanced down, his gaze flickering to the phone for just a split second, but that was all it was, a glance. He saw the name, but it didn't register to him. It was just another name, another distraction in a situation he was determined to control. He dismissed it without a second thought, his focus still on Maya, still on the girl he was certain was hiding something from him. But the crowd saw it. The tension among the onlookers shifted. Those who had been filming with their phones zoomed in closer, capturing every detail. A few whispers began to rise again, this time louder, more urgent. "Did you see that?" one voice murmured. "Isn't that?" The recognition was spreading, though the officer remained completely unaware. Maya, however, felt the shift. She saw the reactions in the crowd, saw the glances exchanged between the people who had been watching in silence. They knew something now that the officer didn't, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of power in her otherwise powerless situation. But that flicker of power didn't erase the fear. The officer's grip on her arm was real, his threats were real, and the idea of being taken into custody, of being dragged away, was terrifying. "Let go of me," Maya finally managed to whisper, her voice small but firm. She wasn't shouting, wasn't begging, but there was strength in those words, strength born from the knowledge of who she was, even if the officer didn't realize it yet. The officer ignored her. His hand remained on her arm as he raised the radio to his mouth, ready to call in backup. His voice was gruff, dismissive. "I've got a situation here," he muttered into the radio, his tone implying that he had already decided how this would end. The crowd shifted again, a few voices growing louder now, emboldened by what they had seen. "She didn't do anything." One voice called out, a woman's voice from the edge of the gathering. Others nodded, murmuring in agreement, though none of them moved closer. Maya's breath came faster now, the panic rising as she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She glanced down at her phone again, still lying on the ground, her father's name glowing brightly on the screen. The connection was still there, just waiting for her to pick it up, waiting for her to speak. But Maya's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anger, confusion. Why had this happened? Why had she become a target of someone else's assumptions? Why had a simple walk home turned into this? The officer, still holding the radio, didn't notice the way the crowd was growing bolder, didn't notice the shift in the air. He was still focused on control, on making sure this situation went his way. But the people watching had started to see the truth. They had seen the name on the phone, seen the injustice of what was happening. And Maya, she was starting to see it too. The fear was still there, but something else was rising within her now, something stronger, something that told her she didn't have to stay silent anymore. The officer's hand tightened once more on her arm, and Maya finally made her decision. "Let me go," she said again, louder this time, her voice carrying across the growing crowd. And for the first time, the officer hesitated. He glanced down at her, the certainty in his eyes flickering as he registered the change in her tone. But before he could respond, the crowd began to speak again, louder now, more insistent. "She's done nothing wrong," someone shouted. "Let her go." The officer looked around, finally noticing the shift in the atmosphere. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the situation, and he still didn't know why. But Maya knew, and soon he would too. Maya felt it. She felt the shift in the air, the collective gaze of the crowd now resting on her, not as a suspect, but as something else, something more. Her fear was still there, but something had changed. There was a spark of clarity now, a decision forming in her mind. For so long, she had been taught to trust the system, to believe in the fairness of those who wore the badge. But this wasn't about fairness, this wasn't about justice. And now, standing in the middle of this street, with the eyes of strangers on her and the officer's hand still gripping her arm, Maya knew she had to speak. She could no longer hide who she was. The officer, sensing her hesitation, took one more step, his frustration clear. His hand moved toward the handcuffs on his belt, the metallic sound of them unhooking sending a ripple through the crowd. The air was thick with anticipation, the crowd shifting uneasily as they realized just how far things had gone. And yet, the officer remained unaware, blind to the truth that was right in front of him. Just as he reached for her other arm, ready to snap the cuffs around her small wrists, Maya finally spoke, her voice steady though quiet at first. "I'm the mayor's daughter." The words, simple but charged, hung in the air for a moment. There was silence, a stillness, as if the world itself had paused to hear them. The officer, caught in his own momentum, didn't seem to register them right away. His hand hovered over the cuffs, his brow furrowing as if trying to make sense of what he had just heard. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice edged with disbelief. He wasn't accustomed to being questioned. To him, this was just another day of maintaining order, of enforcing the rules as he saw fit. But something in Maya's tone, something in the weight of those words, made him hesitate. The crowd, however, understood immediately. A few gasps rippled through the onlookers, followed by a murmur that grew louder, more urgent. People began whispering to each other, confirming what they had just heard. Some pointed at the phone that still lay on the ground, with the mayor's name glowing on the screen. "She's the mayor's daughter." Someone from the crowd finally shouted, their voice breaking the tension like a crack of thunder. The officer froze. For the first time, his certainty wavered. His grip on Maya's arm loosened, though he didn't let go completely. He stared down at her, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a sign that this was a trick, some kind of game. But the crowd was no longer silent, no longer passive. The truth had been revealed, and the whispers were turning into voices, voices of indignation, disbelief, and shock. "She's telling the truth," another bystander called out, louder this time. That's the mayor's daughter. Let her go. The officer's face flushed with confusion and then with something else, an emotion he wasn't used to feeling, uncertainty. He glanced around, realizing now that the crowd was no longer on his side. The people he had ignored, the witnesses who had stood quietly, were now speaking up, their eyes on him, waiting for his next move. But even with the truth staring him in the face, the officer hesitated, his hand hovering over the handcuffs still, as though he wasn't sure whether to proceed or retreat. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend himself, but before he could say anything, a new voice rang out, a voice that cut through the crowd with authority, with power. Let her go. The crowd parted instinctively, heads turning toward the source of the voice. And there, at the edge of the gathering, stood the mayor himself. His face, normally calm and composed, was etched with a mixture of fury and concern. He pushed his way through the onlookers, his eyes locked on the officer who still had his hand on his daughter's arm. Maya's father, the man who had spent his life upholding justice, was now faced with an injustice happening to his own child. His presence was commanding, undeniable, and as he reached the center of the crowd, his voice echoed once more, firm and unwavering. I said, let her go. The officer, his face drained of color, dropped his hand from Maya's arm, stepping back as if he had been struck. His eyes darted between Maya and the mayor, realization finally dawning on him, though far too late. The crowd watched in silence now, the tension reaching its peak. The officer's authority, once so absolute, crumbled in the face of the truth. He had pushed too far, and now the consequences were standing before him in the form of the very man whose daughter he had wrongfully detained. Maya, her heart still racing, stepped back, her eyes meeting her father's. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the anger at what had happened, at how far things had gone before anyone had stepped in. The officer, shaken and unsure, stammered out a weak defense. I didn't know. But the mayor's expression didn't change. He wasn't interested in excuses. His gaze remained fixed on the officer, unblinking, unrelenting. You didn't ask. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd stood still, watching as the officer, once so certain of his control, wilted under the weight of his mistake. The handcuffs he had been so eager to use remained in his hands, unused, as he finally understood the gravity of what he had done. And in that moment, with the truth laid bare and the crowd bearing witness, the officer realized just how far things had gone wrong. But there was no going back. The confrontation was over, and he had lost. Maya, still shaken but now standing taller, took a step toward her father, who placed a protective arm around her shoulders. Together, they turned away from the scene, leaving the officer standing in the center of the street, his authority shattered, his actions exposed for all to see. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, the weight of what had just unfolded settled over the street like a heavy fog. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were only just beginning. The officer, once so sure of his power, stood frozen in place, his face pale, his handcuffs still hanging limply by his side. He looked around, as if searching for a way out, but there was none. The whispers in the crowd turned to murmurs of anger and disbelief. Phones were still raised, capturing the final moments of the incident, the proof of what had happened. People exchanged looks of outrage, some shaking their heads, others openly calling for the officer to be held accountable. There was no denying what they had seen, no erasing the reality that had just played out before their eyes. And then, as if from nowhere, another figure appeared, a man in a uniform, moving quickly and with purpose. The officer's superior, his captain, pushed his way through the remnants of the crowd. His expression was stern, his eyes cold. He had been briefed on what had occurred, and there was no time for explanations or excuses. Without a word, the captain took the officer by the arm and pulled him aside. The officer, whose demeanor had been so commanding moments ago, now seemed to shrink under the weight of his actions. His shoulders sagged, and his gaze fell to the ground. There was no bravado left, no defense to be made. He knew, as did everyone watching, that the consequences were already in motion. "What were you thinking?" The captain's voice cut through the air, low but unmistakably firm. There was no need for further explanation, the gravity of the officer's mistake had been laid bare for all to see. And now, he would face the consequences, both from within the department and from the public, whose trust he had so badly betrayed. The officer said nothing. His face was a mask of regret, his posture slumped in defeat as his captain's words washed over him. This was no longer about control or authority, it was about accountability. And in this moment, the officer's authority was gone, replaced by the reality of the justice that would follow. As the officer was led away, the crowd began to thin out, but the murmurs of anger and disbelief continued. The story of what had happened would spread quickly, the footage captured on phones making its way to the public. The outrage would follow, as would the calls for justice. There would be no hiding from the truth now. And in the midst of it all, Maya stood quietly beside her father, the tension of the moment past but the emotions still lingering, fear, confusion, anger. She glanced up at her father, his arms still protectively around her shoulders, and for the first time that day, she felt a sense of relief. The mayor, who had always been a figure of calm strength in the face of adversity, now turned to his daughter, his expression softening as he looked down at her. The weight of what had happened was not lost on him, but in this moment, his focus was on her, on the safety of his child, on the injustice she had just endured. For a moment, there was only silence between them, the chaos of the crowd fading into the background. And then, in a voice filled with quiet reassurance, her father spoke. "It's over now," he said gently, his hand squeezing her shoulder. "Justice will be served. I'll make sure of it." Maya, still shaken but reassured by her father's words, nodded slowly. She didn't need to say anything in return, the look in her father's eyes was enough. There was a promise in them, a promise that this would not go unpunished, that the system would not fail her. Together, they turned and began to walk away from the scene, her father's arms still wrapped around her protectively. Maya's steps were slow, her mind still processing everything that had happened, but with each step, the weight of the moment began to lift, replaced by the comfort of knowing she wasn't alone in this fight. As they walked, the officer's fate was already sealed. The public outcry would follow, and the system that had failed Maya today would be forced to reckon with itself. Justice, slow as it sometimes was, would come. And while the scars of the day's events would take time to heal, Maya knew she had the strength to move forward. With her father by her side, she walked away from the scene, leaving behind the chaos, the anger, and the fear. But she didn't walk away from the truth. The truth had been exposed, and now the world would have to face it. The officer is taken aside by his captain, his demeanor crumbling as Maya walks away, hand in hand with her father. Justice, long overdue, is already in motion. The events of that day were not just about a young girl and a single officer. They were a reflection of something much larger, something that echoes across countless communities and continues to affect lives every day. Maya's story, though deeply personal, is not unique. It's an illegal immigrant, a stark reminder of the power dynamics that exist, the unchecked authority that can lead to the abuse of power, and the deep-seated biases that shape so many interactions between law enforcement and communities of color. Racial profiling is not an isolated incident, it is a pervasive issue, one that has shattered lives, eroded trust, and left scars that run deep through generations. Too often, innocent people like Maya are caught in the crosshairs of a system designed to protect them, only to find themselves victimized by the very authority meant to ensure their safety. What happened to Maya is a reflection of the injustice that so many have faced and continue to face. It raises important questions about accountability, about the role of those in power, and about how we, as a society, choose to respond when the system fails. How many more children, mothers, fathers, and neighbors must endure this before meaningful change is made? So now we ask you, how should we handle these situations when they happen in real life? What can we do to ensure that those in power are held accountable and that justice is truly served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful and you believe in the importance of shedding light on these real-life injustices, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Together, we can share more stories that challenge, inspire, and call for change. Click the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Your voice matters, and through these stories, we can make sure it's heard.